But below. So, the late, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, in his commentary on this parsha, spoke about the difference between American and British monuments. Okay, if you go, and like, we live here, so we know this, right? But if you go, I mean, the exception, I guess, is the Washington Monument, right? But if you go to the Lincoln Memorial or the Jefferson Memorial or the FDR Memorial, right? The words that those people are known for are inscribed in the monument, right? And if you remember when the Martin Luther King monument first went up, there was a big controversy because the quote attributed to him was not accurate. I mean, it was a paraphrase of what he said rather than what he actually said, and it made him look kind of arrogant, right? And so they had to change it, right? So the words on the monuments are important, right? But where he says, and again, I have to take his word for it, that British monuments just have a statue of the person and their dates, okay? They don't tell a story. And even, he says, the monument to Winston Churchill, right, who was one of the great orators of modern history, no words, just, his picture, his name, and his dates, right? Now, why is this? Sachs says it's because England is a tradition-based society, whereas the United States is a covenant-based society. Okay? In a tradition-based society, and this is a quote from Sachs, in a tradition-based society like England, things are as they are because that is how they work. England was not a nation or a creed or a language or a state, but a home. Things at home don't need an explanation. They are there because they are there, right? And if you think about it, I mean, this is the case, right? I mean, I can tell you, who sat where at our kitchen table when I was a kid growing up in New Jersey, right? I can't tell you why, but I can tell you, right? I mean, there's certain things they are because they are, and they don't need a reason, right? And whereas the United States is a covenant society, right? Covenant societies don't worship tradition for tradition's sake, right? And if you think about that, it's actually true. I mean, something being old and ancient, right? That's a good quality in England. It's a good quality in Judaism, right? It's a bad quality in the United States, right? We don't worship tradition for tradition's sake. We don't value the past because it's old, right? We remember the past because it was events in the past that led to the collective determination that moved people to create the society in the first place. The Pilgrim Fathers of America were fleeing religious persecution in search of religious freedom. Okay, and I spoke last night a little bit about myth, right? And the myth is like the organizing story of American society, and it doesn't mean it's necessarily true. It doesn't mean it's necessarily false either, right? But yes, the Pilgrims came here searching for religious freedom. That is a true statement. the Pilgrims came here because they believed in religious freedom, that is a false statement, right? They did not believe in religious freedom, right? They wanted freedom to worship as they felt was correct, but within the society that they created, you had the freedom to worship in the way that the Pilgrims felt correct, right? Not in the way you felt correct if you didn't agree with them, right? But we don't pay attention to that because it's not really important, right? The point is that we have certain ideals, and as we learn to look at the history of our society more critically, we don't always live up to those ideals, right? But the ideals are there, and the ideals are there to be called upon, right? And this, I think, was really, for example, the genius of Martin Luther King, right? And why he was able to create a multiracial and multi-religious movement, right? Because he didn't get up there and say, white people are bad, right? He got up and he didn't get up there and say, America is bad. America has ideals, and those ideals are great, and we haven't always lived up to them, and now it's time to live up to them, right? And even, when he called out the racists in the South, he also believed that they could have a change of heart, right? That one day, even in the South, Black people and white people, Jews and Gentiles, Catholics and Protestants would sit down and dine together at the table of brotherhood, right? We have ideals that inspire us. It's a covenant society, right? And what Sachs is trying to say, and I mean, I would say this: Rabbi Sachs admired America in a way, frankly, that only foreigners can, right? Because he saw the virtues and he didn't see the flaws, right, to a large extent. But one of Sachs's projects was to make the UK more like America. Okay, and in a way, when he talks about covenant societies, more like Judaism. Okay, now why would Sachs want the UK to be more like America? Why would he want that? Why would that be important to the leader of the Jewish community of the United Kingdom? Yeah, Steve.
Well, the peace of possibility, but you go down when you go in to God.
Right.
And I want to be well, I'm not
Right. Well, the one united religion is an important part of it, although, to a certain extent, I mean, Jonathan Sachs, or now his successor, Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mervis, they're often considered the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, right? They're not really. They're the chief rabbi of the Hebrew congregations of the United Kingdom, which is a voluntary association, right? So they're not the chief rabbi of the ultra-Orthodox, and they're not the chief rabbi of the Reform or Conservative. They're really just the chief rabbi of the mainstream Orthodox, right? But they have a role in the hierarchy, right? And because, why? Because there's the Archbishop of Canterbury, and there's the Cardinal of Westminster, and the Jews said, we want a representative, right? And because of that, the chief rabbi does things that no other Orthodox rabbi can do. Like, for example, Chief Rabbi Mervis attended the king's coronation on Shabbos in a cathedral. Right now, the prince who had a the king now, who had a very, I love, right, King Charles, always sounds great to me. King Charles, right, had a great relationship with Rabbi Sachs in particular, and King Charles let Rabbi Mervis stay in the palace where they were, so that he'd be in walking distance of the cathedral, right? Make sure he had kosher food and Shabbos meals and all, right? But normally an Orthodox rabbi doesn't go to a cathedral on Shabbos, right? Or on Sunday or on Monday, right? But I mean, here's the thing, right? I mean, is that how do you become English? Right? How do you become English? You can't become English. What?
English.
You're born English, right? But not only you're born English, your parents were born English, and your grandparents were born English, and so on and so forth, right? You can become a citizen of the United Kingdom, right? You can become a citizen of the United Kingdom, but you can't become English, right? How do you become American? Right? You become American by becoming a citizen, right? And you're American, right? And you have to swear allegiance. Right, I mean, it's fascinating, right? If you are a UK civil servant, you swear allegiance to the king, right? If you are a US civil servant, you swear allegiance to, no, to the Constitution, right? To the Constitution. If you take an oath of office, right, you swear allegiance to the Constitution, right? It's a wholly different ballgame, right? And I believe, I mean, Sachs never wrote this, but I believe that Sachs wanted British Jews to be able to be really British, right? And in order to be really British, the UK had to be more like the United States, right? Based on covenant and not based on ancestry, right? And this is, to me, is the fascinating thing, right? Because you can become Jewish, right? I mean, even though we talk about Jews as a people and even as an ethnicity, you can become Jewish, right? And, you know, I mean, I know I asked this question once before, right? But go to the Lincoln Monument, right? The Lincoln Memorial, and stand there, right? And you feel something, right? Go to Gettysburg, and you feel something, right? Now, question. Anybody here have ancestors who lived in this country when Lincoln was president? You did?
Yeah, Yankee, your grandfather was a Yankee. Yeah.
Okay, all right, but that's pretty rare, right? I mean, most American Jews are descended from people who came here in between the 1890s and the 1920s. right? I didn't have any ancestors, right, who were here when Lincoln was president or when the Battle of Gettysburg was fought. Doesn't mean it's less my story. Doesn't mean it's less my story, right? You go there and you feel this is my story, right? Because you can become truly American, and then that is your story, right? And there's a famous responsum by a man who was known as Obadiah Hager, okay, Obadiah the convert, okay, and Obadiah Hager sent a shelah, a question, a formal legal question to Maimonides, and he said, look, right, all of our prayers, right, we talk about Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avoteinu, right, our God and the God of our ancestors. Should I say those words because I'm a convert? They're not my ancestors, right? Famous responses from Maimonides. What do you think Maimonides said? All right, well, we all know converts, right? Do they not say the same prayers that we say? Of course they do, right? Why do they say the same prayers? Why do they say Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avoteinu? I'm not even going to get into Elohei Avoteinu or Elohei Avoteinu ve'Imoteinu. It's a different question, okay? But why do converts still say Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avoteinu? What? It's a simple, obvious answer.
They were, those words are their words.
Right, and how do we call up a convert to the Torah? Exactly. So who is your ancestor? Your ancestor is Abraham. Right? Your ancestor is Abraham, and therefore they are your ancestors. Right? In the same way that, you know, I could stand here on Lincoln's birthday, right, and read 7 years ago, our forefathers brought, no, hey, they weren't your forefathers, right? They were, right? They become your ancestors by enculturation, right? And this, I think, is why Sachs loved America, because he wanted for the Jews of the UK or the Jews of France, right? Because I had relatives. I mean, I knew them in Israel, right? Because they lived in Israel, but relatives who survived the Holocaust in, well, we always say Lithuania, right? It turns out that the town where my family came from, which we think of as Lithuania, is actually in Belarus, okay? But the same thing, right? They survived the Holocaust, and then after the war, they went to live in France, okay? And they lived in France for about 15 years, and then they said, you know, we will never be French, okay? And forget the ones who survived the Holocaust. They spoke French with a Yiddish accent. But their kids, who are my contemporaries, who were born in France, speak French like, you know, like a French person, right? They're still Jew and can never be fully French. If you're a Jew or a Muslim, right? And this is still a problem in France, right? But who who in this country says Jews will never be American? Muslims will. There are people who say it. There are people who say it, right? And we all know who they are, right? And we all know why they're dangerous, okay? And this is why, I mean, I would consider myself fairly moderate, right? But these people drive me nuts, okay? Because they say to me and to you and to you and to you and to you, Colonel Zafur, you are not really American because you are Jewish and because your ancestors haven't been here long enough, right? And this is, if there is such a thing as civil heresy, right? This is civil heresy, right? And, you know, when Kelly taught at a day school in Atlanta and was told by a fellow teacher, you're not really Jewish because you're a convert, that was it for her, right? And anybody who says to a convert, you're not really Jewish, that's literally heresy, right? And to say to people who are not Christians, you're not really American, that is a civil heresy, right? And this idea of, you know, of a master narrative, right? We have ideals in this country that we haven't always lived up to, right? But the ideals call us to be better people, right? And one of those ideals, and this is something that Judaism and Americanism have in common, is that once you swear allegiance to those ideals and go through the proper ceremony, right? I mean, you could love America and, you know, have the right ideals, but if you haven't gone through the citizenship process, you're not a citizen, right? And you could love Judaism, but if you haven't gone to the Beit Din and the mikveh, you're not a Jew, right? We have a process, right? But once you go through the process, you belong, right? You are the same as people whose ancestors were part of this community for hundreds and hundreds, and in the case of Jews, thousands of years, right? And it is this idea of covenant, and I know I've gone long and I'll wrap up, but one of the things that surprised me that Sachs never said in this Drasha, at least, and I think I've never seen it in anything he wrote, and I find it fascinating. The modern, not just modern actor, it goes back to the 1800s. The Hebrew term for the United States is Artsot Habrit. Okay, the land of the covenant, right? That what makes the United, right? Instead of saying, it could have said Artsot Hamidu Chadot or something like that, which would be a more literal translation of United States, but it's Artsot Habrit, the lands of the covenant, right? And whoever, and I don't know who coined that phrase, but they were really onto something, right? What makes us American is not ancestry, and it's not skin color, and it's not religion. It's loyalty to the covenant, right? And you know, and I for one owe really a debt of gratitude to Rabbi Sachs for helping me to understand this, you know, in the way that you know, sometimes, I mean, you know, the greatest person to understand the American character going back to the 1800s was de Tocqueville, who was French, right? I mean, you need outsiders to really help you understand who you truly are. And in that sense, Saks in a way was kind of the Tocqueville of our age. Shabbat Shalom, any questions or comments? Yeah, Dee.
Oh, confused me. Whenever you fill out, not how many, but in many cases, when you're filling out certain kinds of official forms,
Right.
they will ask you to dedicate your religion and your ethnicity. How does a Jew respond to that?
Well, I mean, you don't see that much anymore. You never see that on government. Because government forms, I mean, unless maybe you're joining the military, I don't know. Where they really, or, you know, lahavdil, if you're in prison, right? I mean, the ACLU just sued the DC Department of Corrections for making it hard for people who claim they were Jews to get kosher meals, right? And the jail said, oh, you gotta prove it, you need a letter from the whatever. But I mean, here's the thing. So look, if I'm in a hospital, obviously I say Jewish, right? Because they want to know that because they need to know, God forbid you. I mean, I don't want to say God forbid you need a chaplain, because the chaplain's playing an important role, but you understand that, right? I will tell you honestly, I used to not want to say that I was white. Okay, because frankly, those same people who say that I'm not really an American also say I'm not really white, right? And, we have a difference, but now I do put white, and I'll tell you why, okay? Because if I go to a department store or a jewelry store, loss prevention doesn't follow me around, right? If a cop pulls me over, I'm not really afraid that encounter is going to wind up in my death, right? So for the purposes of what kind of really matters in society, we are, right?
So would you say, this is the part that will confuse me, whether to say Jewish or whether to say Hebrew or whether to say both.
I've never seen Jewish and Hebrew. I mean, Hebrew is an older term, right? If you look at, some of the older organizations in this country, like it was the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, or the Hebrew Union College, or the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, right? Those are because Jew was considered like a slur, right? And then at a certain point, Jews said, we don't accept that this is a slur, and we're going to reclaim the term, right? But there's no difference between Hebrews and Jews in that.
But if you're using white for one of the class, and how can, whether it's also the same race, I see a lot of stuff on the medical terms, and I'm actually saw a lot of it on children and the time. So the distinction, I never really.
I don't know. I mean, I think there may be like statistical, even medical reasons. Like, how would they know that Jews are susceptible to certain genetic diseases if they don't know you're Jewish, right? I would think I don't have any problem. Anyway.
Hey, Rabbi,
Yeah.
you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'll preface my comments by saying I agree with absolutely everything you said. With that out of the way, I do have to wonder to what extent we as a people have contributed to that perception that we're not American, that we're not part of the collective American nation, right? Because historically, Jews have kept to themselves. We've had such debates about whether or not we should eat or drink non-Jews. And even in contemporary America, there's still Jewish enclaves that are very cloistered, keep to themselves, do not interact with the outside world. Even if you look at how we address ourselves, right? So blacks may be addressed as African Americans, Chinese as Chinese Americans. We contrast and addressed as American Jews. And so I could see where someone would question where our ultimate loyalty is. Is it to Judaism? Are we more loyal to a Jew in Europe than, the non-Jew neighbor living next door? So yes, I agree with absolutely everything you said. And, I would certainly hope that having made a career of the Army and then to Iraq and Afghanistan, I would be perceived as a patriotic American. But playing devil's advocate, for lack of a better term, I can see where people might question, or let me rephrase that. I myself question to what extent we fostered that perception that we're not fully American and that we don't want to be fully.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, and I know it was kind of hard to hear, and so I'm going to just briefly summarize. Dr. Zapor asks, to what extent we don't contribute to that perception that we're not really Americans in the sense of our separating from the society. Historically, there have been debates about whether you can eat or drink with Gentiles, right? Not something anybody here follows, right? But if you look at the Hasidic enclaves and so on and so forth, and I agree with you. I mean, this is really complicated and it's really touchy, right? I mean, and you've heard me say, right, that in terms of developing what I might call a theology of citizenship, right, is that, the people to our left, right, I would consider them like, kosher style as opposed to kosher. They live a Jewish style life as opposed to a Jewish lifestyle, right? And then you have, the Haredi community who, now it is changing. I mean, you have, like the first female Hasidic elected judge in New York, okay? So they're starting some to play more of a role in society, but by and large, they don't participate. I mean, question is, what can I get from society, not what can I give to society for a lot of them. And I think that there is, but we're not unique in that regard, right? I mean, every American is hyphenated, right? Every American is hyphenated, and it's legitimate for an African American to give priority to other African American. I'm not talking in your job, unless you're in a job where you really serve only African Americans, right? But no, it's complicated, right? I mean, the sociology of living in a pluralistic society, right? And that's why the metaphor is, Israel Zangwill wrote about the melting pot, right? America is not a melting pot. It's more like a salad, right? It's more like a salad, right? And you got your cukes and your tomatoes and your olive, and they all have their own identity, but together they make up a salad, right? But it is complicated. I mean, I have no real answer to you, right? I mean, I think that a stereotype can be partially true, but also partially false. and harmful at the same time, right? But I do, like, when I lived in LA, right? And this is, to me, it's a funny story, but if you think about it, it's not necessarily all that funny, right? And this was, I mean, the internet existed, but it wasn't like what it is today. And people generally found apartments in the newspaper, right? In the classifieds, not online. All right. And a friend of mine actually found this place for me. And it was a quadplex. So there's 4 apartments in this house. And the advertisement was in the Jewish Journal, right? And in LA. And I found out that this landlady, whenever she had a vacancy, she would only advertise it in the Jewish Journal, right? And when I went to meet her and sign my lease and pay my rent, she said, I do not discriminate in leasing my apartments. I don't care if my tenants are Reformed, Conservative, or Orthodox. And look, it's perfectly legal to only advertise in the Jewish Journal, right? It's not legal to only rent to Jews, but that was her preference, and she found kind of a legal way to do it, right? So, I mean, what I'm saying is, I mean, and I love the way you phrase it. I agree with everything you said, and yet, right? And I agree with everything that you just said, and yet, right? It is complicated, right? It is absolutely complicated. Okay, Shabbat Shalom. I'll turn it. I'm here already.